Howdy again everyone, and here it is, the brand new Nikon Z 35mm f1.4. Always welcome to see a new official f1.4 hitting the market, and I can't wait to test it out. It's a full frame lens, only for Nikon Z mount mirrorless cameras, and I'd like to thank Nikon UK for loaning me this lens for a couple of weeks for testing, although as usual this is a totally independent review and they've had no input at all into the video. The first feature of this lens that really jumps out to me is its price, only $597 or £650 here in the UK. Nowadays, for a brand new bright aperture full frame 35mm lens, that is a relative bargain. Even Nikon's own 35mm f1.8 S model is $250 more expensive, despite having a maximum aperture 66% darker. Nikon are clearly embarking on a radically different strategy with this Z mount lens, and it'll be interesting to see what compromises they've made in order to get its price as low as this, considering its very bright aperture. Even if the lens has optical compromises, at this price it's still an attractive proposition, because a 35mm f1.4 on full frame not only offers you a useful, moderately wide angle, but can also get you impressively out of focus backgrounds for pretty striking images, if you're close enough to your subject, that is. And on an aps-c or DX Nikon camera, it'll offer a slightly tighter angle of view, therefore being just as useful but in a slightly different way. So even if your images are a little softer with this cheaper lens, they might still look pretty fantastic. It's great to see Nikon putting something like this to market, giving their customers some real choice. The lens itself does have a slightly lower budget feel to it, as you'd expect. It's mostly made of plastic with a slightly rougher textured finish than Nikon's more expensive options, but it still feels solid enough, being based on a metal lens mount with weather sealing. In fact, the lens has quite extensive weather sealing according to Nikon, as you can see here. You don't get an auto manual focus switch with this lens, but we do get one of Nikon's customizable control rings at the back. It turns smoothly and it's set to control your aperture by default, but it can also be set in your camera to control ISO or exposure compensation, or even deactivated completely, which is actually what I normally do, because I find it too easy to accidentally turn that ring. Curiously, one of these control rings is something omitted from Nikon's more expensive 35mm f1.8 S lens. Then comes a broad, rubberized manual focus ring. It turns smoothly, and the focus motor responds to it being turned quite well. And also, the lens doesn't display much focus breathing here, useful for video makers. The lens's autofocus system works at only an average speed, it's no speed demon, and it emits a very quiet whirring sound as it goes, but it's quiet enough to only realistically be audible when recording video with the camera's onboard microphone. It works accurately too. The lens has a 62mm filter size and comes with a handy but pretty simple plastic lens hood. It does not have its own image stabilization, but a lot of Nikon's latest cameras do at least have that built in nowadays. All in all, the build quality is absolutely fine here, considering the price you're paying for it. It doesn't have the fastest autofocus in the world, but at least its focus breathing is impressively under control. So, on to image quality. I'll be testing this thing on a Nikon Z7 with its full frame 45MP sensor. In-camera corrections are turned on for this test. At f1.4 we see excellent sharpness and contrast in the middle of the image, although we're also catching some purple fringing on contrasting edges here. Unfortunately, image quality in the corners is definitely not so great. We are seeing softness and low contrast here, although the picture quality hasn't completely fallen apart. Stop down to f2 for those corners to become sharper and brighter with better contrast, although they're still a bit on the soft side. Back in the middle, any trace of colour fringing is long gone, leaving us with perfect image quality there. At f2.8 the middle looks just as perfect, and the corners are looking better once again. At f4 and f5.6 there are no further improvements in the corners. The lens stays this sharp down to f11, where a little softness due to diffraction begins to kick in. f16 looks soft. Alright then, overall, this is a lens that struggles with corner image quality. It's always lovely and sharp in the middle of your images with excellent contrast, albeit with a touch of purple fringing at f1.4, but you need to stop down to f2.8 for decent, although never razor sharp, image quality in the corners. On a wide-angle lens, you'd hope to see a little better than this. Alright, let's bypass Nikon's automatic corrections by shooting in RAW and take a look at distortion and vignetting. The lens projects an awful lot of barrel distortion here, and at f1.4, vignetting is very strong. It even shows up quite a lot in images with in-camera corrections turned on at f1.4. Stop down to f2 or f2.8 for those corners to brighten up dramatically. Still, it's a poor performance overall. Make sure your RAW images are getting corrected properly here. Let's check out this lens's close-up image quality. It can focus down to about 27 centimeters, which is pretty good. At f1.4 we see good sharpness but with very low contrast, which causes ghosting with a green tint to it. At f2 though, contrast is way better, and at f2.8, close-up image quality is now excellent. Let's see how the lens performs against bright light. As you can see, it's a slightly below average performance. Quite a lot of flaring is visible here, although it's not too opaque. And while we're working in the dark, let's take a look for coma and sun stars. At f1.4, coma levels are very high, unfortunately, particularly for such a modern lens. At f2, that smearing is reduced, and at f2.8, it's basically gone. Let's zoom out and look for sun stars. They only really begin to emerge at f8. Stop down to f11 or f16 and they end up looking very exciting. Next, bokeh. This lens's out-of-focus backgrounds are striking, but also a little nervous, often looking quite jittery, although more deeply out-of-focus backgrounds look softer. And finally, related to bokeh comes longitudinal chromatic aberration. The force is strong on this one at f1.4, as you can see. It's still there at f2, but at f2.8 it's reduced, and at f4 it's gone. Overall, I am deeply fascinated with Nikon's decision to market a lens like this, perhaps a sign that I need to get a life, right? Well, anyway, it's a lens with lots of optical compromises, as you've seen, but also a suitably low price, which makes it attractive, especially considering the cool images it can get for you. Nikon are giving you a clear choice here. Spend more on their 35mm f1.8s lens if you need critical sharpness, or spend less on this brighter f1.4 lens if you only care about getting the most striking images. Anyone who is holding out for a super professional 35mm f1.4 lens will be disappointed here, but I'm not really. I wish more manufacturers would offer such a clear choice. And this will be a useful lens for 4K video work too. It also will feel happier on a 24 megapixel camera where resolution demands aren't quite as high, and on DX cropped cameras. Nikon have been known to work with Tamron's designers in the past. I slightly wonder if this is actually a Tamron designed lens. Just a hunch, who knows, I'm probably wrong, but that wouldn't be such a bad thing anyway. Well, considering the lens's very affordable price, it's certainly the kind of thing I personally wouldn't mind having in my kit bag. Just don't expect miracles out of it if you do decide to buy one. Honestly, even when they're not the sharpest in the world, I still really love these 35mm f1.4 lenses. I love the kind of images they make. Hope you found that review helpful, and if you regularly watch them, then check out my Patreon page in the description below. There you'll find all kinds of bonus content for supporters, as well as early access to lots of reviews. Ciao for now, everyone.